and blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Here's the bike. I'm going to show you guys what to look for when buying these types of bikes. It's pretty simple, but if you're a beginner at this is a perfect spot for you. Good video to watch so you guys can quickly see what's all going on here. For starters, we'll start with the top part of the bike, and we've got the handlebars and all this stuff. With Surrons, this is a common issue. I actually picked this bike up while it was storming outside. He had put it in the bed of his truck and drove it over to me. And the battery was unplugged, obviously, but not the safest thing to do. But these bikes are resilient, so nothing to be concerned about with that. But that's a common issue. But we've got brakes here. Obviously, you want to look at your brake pads and just make sure you got a decent amount of life in them pads. Just a nice bonus, not a big deal, but it's one thing you might want to look out for is just how much brake pad you got left. This one has never been cut, so it's perfectly bled. Same with this one. This one's a little bit spongy, but I just bought this bike and the brakes are perfect. So brakes are important. Throttle is obviously important. Good thing I didn't throttle it. I'm going to turn the bike off. Make sure that thing's nice and snappy. It's not broken. Obviously, we can see that he had a little bit of maybe a little drop or something there, a little scratched up, but nothing to be concerned about. Throttle still works. Throttles are easy to replace as well. Headlight turns on, turn on the switch. Some bikes have light switches. That's a nice touch. This one does not, so the lights do work. Nice to see that works. Another important problem is these tires. You want to find if there's a good amount of tread. Obviously, this one looks good. But as you can tell from right here, we've got some cracks in the tire itself, which is a sign of dry rot. And that's what happens whenever you park on concrete for a long time. The moisture or the oil comes out of the tires themselves and ends up becoming dried out. If you can see right there, there's a little indicator on how far the tire tread should go before it's completely toast cooked. So you just want to double check and make sure that you got some tread left. These ones still got some tread. The front ones usually are good. Here's the back one, for example. Looks like we got some life in it still. We got some more dry rot signs here. Major dry rot sign there, meaning that these tires are pretty much done for. I'll probably use it for a quick little burnout video or something, and that's about it. But that would wrap up today's front end. It's also nice too, just to wrap all this up, check your rotors, make sure they're not rusted out. They look pretty decent. This one's obviously a little dirty, but right where the brakes are being engaged, you can see that it's starting to clean. Then obviously you want to make sure your forks look good. I've already cleaned my fork tubes and stanchions, but I will tell you guys with these KKE forks, you can't take this part off, which is usually your dust cover, your dust seal. On the D&M forks, you can unscrew it and pop this off so you can get a better cleaning job. You can clean underneath these little dust covers. But on the KKEs, you can't. The KKEs, you gotta just take a microfiber cloth and wipe down the whole stanchion. And I took some fork oil, put it on my finger, put it around here, and then compressed the fork so the fork oil got all over. And as you can see, that's what that line there is for. That's because I had already cleaned this thing good. So that's just a little bit of leftover from dirt from the actual covers itself, and that lube is kicking it out. So that's what I recommend doing. KKEs, you can't unscrew it. D&Ms, you can unscrew it. And then it's nice if you have the D&Ms because you can put some actual fork grease or just grease in general right above the covers and screw it back on. And that'll make it really nice. Really nice. So whenever you are compressing it, it feels nice and smooth. Now, another nice thing to look out for is these adjusters. I've never had this issue, but I've realized on this bike that whenever I try to adjust it should not be making that noise. I have to figure out exactly why it's doing that. I believe it's because this upper triple clamp is not loosened enough. They might have over tightened it, and that happens often with these forks, is if you over tighten these clamps, then the adjusters will lock up and seize and they won't work. So you got to torque it down correctly. Same thing with a steer tube. I realize that whenever I'm moving the bars, it's really loose. So all you have to do is just tighten up that steer tube. Now wrap up, obviously, the front end of the bikes. You got Sport and Eco. Obviously, you're going to want to test drive it. I recommend lifting up the bike. Whenever you first come to buy it, you lift up the lower end and run it the back wheel. Just pick it up and run the throttle. In Eco, make sure it fully spins and the wheel doesn't fly off. And then run it in Sport, make sure that's good too. Another very important thing if you're buying a super sketchy bike is just to double check and make sure that this axle is in and it looks secure, because you do not want your front wheel to pop off while you're going. Let's take a nice little look too at the horn. Horn looks decent. Obviously it's a little bit dirty, but nothing looks broken. So I got a pretty good deal on this bike. I paid $2,800. It's got about 1,400 miles on it. And it's a 2024. Not bad. I've got this upgraded subframe. Obviously, you just want to check for cracks, dents, scratches, anything that makes you not smile, because these bikes they're nice when they're really pretty and uncrashed, not clapped. Obviously, you kind of want to scope out your belt, make sure that your belt and everything in here looks pretty much good, no cracks or breaks or anything. The motor everything about this bike looks pretty dirty, but dirt is something you can scrub off, so I'm not too concerned about it. I've got this upgraded subframe. I've also got the stock subframe, which is nice. You obviously want to sit on it, make sure that there's no cracks, breaks. Obviously, again, I'm not going to keep on repeating myself. Just make sure that nothing looks broken. And then we're going to move back to the back of the bike. Here we've got the brake rotor. It's nice and shiny. It's a little dirty here, but that's what happens. Got the upgraded Magura brake, which is nice. There's good brake pads in there still. So nothing to be concerned about there. Obviously the tire's kind of rotting a little bit, which is unfortunate, but tires are not a huge deal. The real concern is the rims. Well, honestly, the rims these days actually aren't even that expensive either. So if you do have a problem with your wheels, they're not a super expensive thing to fix. Obviously, kind of, if you want to get down into the depths of it here, you can pull on your spokes and make sure that they're not flexing too much or bending or too easy to move, because that's a clear sign that they're not trued. And whenever the spokes are loose, then the wheel won't spin straight and it'll kind of wobble. And that's a uncomfortable thing to ride in. Obviously, everything looks good. With this bike, I noticed that these things weren't tightened up correctly, which is not, ideal. You want to have this all the way snug on this frame, and then you want to have the chain pushed back as far as you can. This is just a little too loose in my opinion. I like to have it about that much wobble. This one's got a little too much. If you can shake the top, I mess on the bottom. I don't like that. If you have your chain too loose, sometimes it'll chip away at your little tiny sprocket up here, and sometimes it'll just bang around. You don't want it to bang around on your new bike. So, just scoping everything out. Everything looks good. No cracks in the seat. Clear sign to tell if the bike's been looped is if you look at the seat right here. There's no cracks. No, it looks like the rear fender was removed, but I know why. It's because there's a wheelie rack right here, so I'm not concerned about it. But obviously, clear sign that it's been crashed, as if this is busted up. No rear fender. Clear sign it's busted up. But that will kind of wrap up today's little tiny go through, quick little spot. Whenever you're meeting up with somebody, these are things that you would want to check. Obviously, I'm going to remove these. I don't like how he removed the fender and kept the bolts here, because with a chain this loose, it might just hit this somehow if I'm really just going crazy one day, or eventually the chain will loosen up over time. So if it keeps on loosening up and it hits that, that could cause a disaster. But Nothing about this bike screams, you know, clapped. Seems like a pretty good deal. Obviously, too, whenever you guys are buying your Surron, very important trick is to check your battery and just make sure that everything looks squared away in here. Like I said, I had the new 2024, so I have one connector, the breaker there. If you want to check, make sure that this cable and the brake and the battery connector is in good shape. Flick off that circuit breaker. Always flick off that circuit breaker if you're moving around or messing with the battery. So boom, flick that over, take it out. You can inspect it. There's a serial number on there if you want to look it up, and check the number of cycles and stuff. You can do that as well, but you don't really, there's not really a need to do that as long as you trust your seller. It's not a big deal. Batteries aren't that expensive. Nothing about this bike is really that expensive to, you know, waste someone's day over. So they're just really cool bikes, really fun. And those are some little tiny details you want to look whenever you're buying the bikes. Obviously you want to test drive it. Obviously you want to, hold on. Oh yeah. Florida things. So obviously you want to test drive the bike, but those are just some things that you want to look out for. Before I test drive a bike, I always like to spin it, like I said earlier. But first things first, before you test the bike, is check your axles. Last thing you want is your axles to come off the bike. Now I'm going to go home and I'm going to dial this thing in, fix the little tiny mistakes that I've noticed, and yeah, give it a nice cleaning. And that's about it. This bike is good to go.
What a wonderful world.
Preload if you want. If you're a heavier set dude or plan on doing harder riding, you want to turn it the way that the plus is. If you're a lighter type of rider, you want to turn it the way that the negative is. For rebound, that's obvious. That's the speed at which the forks will compress and then come back to you, aka rebound. So if you want it to go faster, obviously click it faster. If you want to go slower, click it slower. Those are your only two adjustments. So whenever you're tightening your chain, you want to match this level right here on the other side.